Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this week I'm going to be updating our rest of season rankings at running back and wide receiver. What I wanted to do is I wanted to go through and talk about some of these guys that are going to be skyrocketing up these rankings, give you a little explanation of why. That way you know, hell, maybe we go through and look to sell high. Maybe we go through and look to buy low, but these are players that have been changing in value a ton. Before we get into it though, go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. If you have any questions, feel free to go down there and drop them in that comment section. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And also in the comment section, you can find a link to Underdog Fantasy, where there are all these awesome player props you can check out. My favorite is going to be the PJ Walker less than yards for Thursday night. I know it's a good matchup, but come on, it's freaking PJ Walker. When you sign up for Underdog and use promo code FLOG, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. Available in damn near every state. But I think that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into these players. I want to start it off with the running back that just came back from his injury and looked pretty good. James Conner. Now with James Conner, I get it. I know. I mean, he wasn't out there just winning matchups. The man had a whopping 7 carries for 45 rushing yards. Hey, he didn't score a touchdown. I mean, he only had 19 receiving yards go along with it. But I'm not just looking at the box score here. What we need to do is we need to look at the underlying numbers. We know that Garrett Williams went to the IR. So the question is, what's the role of Eno Benjamin? How many touches will Eno Benjamin be seeing? How many snaps will he be out there? Because that's the only competition that James Conner is going to have for the Arizona Cardinals the rest of the season. Well, this past week, if this is any indication of what we should expect going forward, looks like that role of Eno Benjamin is pretty damn small. It looks like James Conner is going to be the 3-down running back here. And this is very exciting because while, yes, I know Arizona's been bad. Arizona, the bottom of this division, Arizona's been one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL. Really excited to watch their Hard Knocks this week. But I think they actually will get better as the season goes on, because we have to think about what has happened with the Arizona Cardinals so far, at least on the offensive side of the ball. At the very beginning of this season, you had no DeAndre Hopkins with the suspension. You also had Rondale Moore injured. On top of this, James Conner went down. And right as you were getting back Rondale Moore and DeAndre Hopkins, then Hollywood Brown, the other wide receiver one in your offense, goes down with his own injury. So while, yes, the Arizona Cardinals have been very bad, I think that there are reasons to believe this will be a better offense going forward when we can finally get all these players back on the field healthy together. And with James Conner, he's seen consistent work as a pass catcher in this offense pretty much every single week outside of the 1 week he left early. The man's averaging about 5 targets a game. When you remove the Philadelphia game, you have 6, 4, 5, 3, 5 targets out of this backfield. So I actually really like the underlying numbers with James Conner. If you look at the snaps played, I mean, I think you got to give the man his credit. And now our next guy, super brief, Joe Mixon. Okay, with Joe Mixon, looks phenomenal. I don't even want to focus in on the 5 touchdowns he had this week. I want to more so look at the reason why we are drafting him coming into the season. He is one of the very few bell cow running backs left. The man has 151 carries this year and 50 targets. Joe Mixon has 50 targets. I'm going to assume that surprises a lot of people here. If you look at the raw volume that he's had, I mean, he's had over 200 opportunities if we include targets and carries. The 8 touchdowns he has scored so far this season, honestly, doesn't even really seem that unsustainable if we're looking at the raw amount of looks he has had, combined with the fact that the Cincinnati Bengals offense is pretty damn good. But going over to our next guy, TJ Hockenson, I'm taking a massive L here. I liked Hockenson coming into the season. I drafted him in a lot of best ball leagues. But with the trade over to Minnesota, what we said is, well, yes, on paper, this is a much better situation, much better offense, much better landing spot for TJ Hockenson than Detroit. I thought it was going to take time for TJ Hockenson to get implemented into this Minnesota Vikings offense. And we had beat reporters coming out in Minnesota saying, oh no, this coaching staff saying Hockenson is going to be very involved right away. I didn't buy into it. I thought it was going to take time for Hockenson to learn the scheme, both as a blocker as well as a receiver. We know tight ends historically take a little bit more time to develop. But if Hawkinson's coming in his first week in Minnesota, has 9 targets, 9 receptions, and 70 receiving yards, a way larger role than I was expecting. He has looked phenomenal. And what happens if he starts scoring touchdowns? I think TJ Hockenson is that very exciting player. Obviously, we saw the ceiling back against Seattle when the man had 12 targets, 8 receptions, 180 receiving yards, and multiple receiving touchdowns. But now, before we get to Justin Fields, let's go ahead and let's actually talk about some more running backs and receivers. Let's go over to another running back that just came back from his own injury, Cordarrelle Patterson. Very similar to James Conner. I mean, hell, this is a running back that I didn't expect to have a massive role this past week. I thought his first week back here from the knee injury, it was going to take him some time to get involved. Nope. Cordarrelle Patterson, 13 carries, multiple rushing touchdowns, crushes immediately. We know Cordarrelle Patterson's a great passing down running back because the man spent pretty much a decade of his life playing the wide receiver position. If we're looking at the usage that we had with the other running backs in Atlanta, I mean, you had a combined 17 carries between Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley. And also, if we are going to be looking at the usage as a pass catcher, Tyler Algier had a reception. So it was very frustrating to see how many touches went in the direction of both Algier and Huntley. But I honestly think this should get dramatically scaled back going forward. Cordarrelle Patterson looks like by far and away the best running back in this offense. They told us he was going to be limited. You would assume that Atlanta has no incentive to push all in and go for it right now. But hell, why would they not? They're sitting there, fighting for the division. It's not like you're saving Cordarrelle Patterson for the future. The man's 31 years old. I think Cordarrelle Patterson expands his role going forward and looked really good this past week. Now, Joshua Palmer, another name that we have to bring up. Palmer looks like an auto-start wide receiver until we see otherwise. Until we see Mike Williams back, until we see Keenan Allen back, until one of these wide receivers is active and on the field running routes on a Sunday, I'm not believing that they're coming back. I'm done sitting here saying, oh no, Keenan Allen's about to return. Keenan Allen will be back soon. Don't worry. I'm done doing it. I don't know when they come back. Joshua Palmer, the past 2 weeks without these receivers, has had a total of 22 targets. He's attached to Justin Herbert. You really have no target competition whatsoever. So Joshua Palmer, locked and loaded, top 24 wide receiver going forward. Now going over to our next guy, let's look at Garrett Wilson here. With Garrett Wilson, a wide receiver that also may be that locked and loaded top 24 wide receiver. Since Elijah Moore's been benched, Corey Davis has been injured, Garrett Wilson has taken up a monstrous amount of receiving yards as a percentage of this team's overall offense. Over the past 2 games, Garrett Wilson has had a total of 200 receiving yards in an offense that can barely average 200 receiving yards a game with Zach Wilson. Of course, Flacco was a little bit different at the beginning of the season. With Garrett Wilson, he's getting all the snaps you'd ever want to see. He's running every single route possible. The man's had 16 targets over the past 2 weeks. He's the alpha wide receiver 1 for the Jets. Elijah Moore is straight up benched, only playing in 3 wide receiver sets as the exclusive slot wide receiver. Didn't see a target this past week. And this coaching staff is saying that when Corey Davis comes back, he's going to be splitting the role with Denzel Mims. Garrett Wilson's role is safe here. Garrett Wilson was a phenomenal wide receiver prospect coming out of Ohio State. Garrett Wilson was a more productive asset than Chris Olave in this Ohio State offense at a younger age. He's an elite level talent. His situation has gotten a hell of a lot better. You just need some more passing volume in New York. But I'd imagine that actually they're going to be a little bit better going forward because the past 3 weeks, while I'm not a Zach Wilson believer, we can at least admit he's had some tough matchups. Denver, New England, and Buffalo. Now, our next guy, let's go over and look at George Pickens. With Pickens, I have to take my L here. A couple weeks back, about 3 weeks ago, after George Pickens was making highlight catches, highlight touchdown grabs in primetime games, we were going through and saying, while yes, George Pickens looks like a phenomenal talent, you need to go through and you need to sell him because he's playing in one of the worst passing offenses in the NFL, and there are too many guys taking targets here. It doesn't matter how effective, how efficient, how great George Pickens looks if this is the situation he's in. The situation has changed, ladies and gentlemen. Removing Chase Claypool from this offense, in my opinion, is going to make a massive deal. Because if you look at what we've seen so far for George Pickens, the man has been by far and away the most efficient wide receiver in Pittsburgh by a mile. If we're looking at his yards per target here, he's blowing Deontay Johnson out the water. He was blowing Chase Claypool out the water. I mean, with only 43 targets, the man's had 338 receiving yards. Compare this to Deontay Johnson at 76 targets, almost double, and sitting there with about the same receiving yardage. So I think if you have Chase Claypool leaving, where Deontay Johnson was already getting 10 targets a game, it's not really going to positively impact Deontay Johnson. Well, trust me, I have way too much Deontay Johnson on my teams. I wish it would possibly impact him. He's been already getting enough targets, and he just has been very inefficient with them. The player that has been hyper efficient, the rookie that should continue to get better going forward, George Pickens, now should take that step up. So with Pickens, very similar to the other rookie wide receiver we talked about in Garrett Wilson, I think going forward, you can make an argument that if he continues to take strides the way he is a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy. Now, let's go over and let's look at a veteran now. Amari Cooper continues to move up my rankings every single week. Every single week, Amari Cooper will marginally move up these rankings until we get Deshaun Watson back in. If you look historically at Deshaun Watson's adjusted yards per pass attempt, in my opinion, the best way to actually measure the performance of a quarterback and how they are going to be able to make a positive or a negative impact on a receiver in a fantasy football context, Deshaun Watson's career average would have made him a top 3 quarterback in adjusted yards per pass attempt last season. That is his career average. Deshaun Watson, historically speaking, since the year 2017, has had a floor and ceiling combination in fantasy that is only equivalent, literally only equivalent to Patrick Mahomes. You can't find another player that has had that consistent elite level production at the quarterback position. The Cleveland Browns traded 3 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson, all the baggage that came with him, and then decided to give him the most guaranteed money in NFL history. Not because he's a bad quarterback, because he's an elite level QB. Amari Cooper's already been phenomenal with Jacoby Brissett. Amari Cooper's had 66 targets, 553 receiving yards. Now, what is a little funny here is if we're looking at the home away splits for Amari, I mean, they are striking. You look at the away games, I mean, hell, 17 receiving yards, 9 receiving yards, 74 receiving yards, 6 targets, 4 targets, 4 targets. Whereas you look at the home games, 101, 76, 94, 131. It's laughable. The man has yet to score a touchdown in an away game. So I think what's maybe a little bit nice with Amari is we'll know when to start him. Yeah, you'll know when to put him in there as your wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. Maybe Watson comes in and elevates the overall offense, and especially what they can do with their passing volume. But now let's go to the man of the hour. Let's go over to Justin Fields here. Justin Fields, we go way back. Y'all know I was a massive proponent in dynasty rookie drafts 2 years ago, telling everybody Justin Fields is massively overrated. Justin Fields isn't as good as you think he is. Go draft Trey Lance at a cheaper cost. He has more draft capital. He finds himself with Kyle Shanahan, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk instead of Matt Nagy in Chicago. He has arguably more rushing upside based on what we saw in college. I was all in on Lance over Fields. So we always are going to have that attached to us. But I have to give credit where credit is due for Justin Fields. The rushing production is phenomenal. 602 rushing yards so far this season. The man may very easily and probably will get to 1,000 rushing yards as a quarterback this year. I'm no mathematician here, but if you look at 1,000 rushing yards and convert that over to fantasy points for passing yards, that's an additional 2,500 passing yards in fantasy points. Just with his rushing yards, not even accounting for the rushing touchdowns. From a fantasy football standpoint, in a 4-point passing touchdown league where rushing is pretty much everything at this point for fantasy quarterbacks, Justin Fields looks like a quarterback 1 rest of season. He looks like a locked and loaded starter regardless of the matchup each and every week. You have to have Justin Fields in your lineup. With that being said, I do want to be on the record regarding the Chicago Bears wide receivers, in that I still stand by the fact you don't want Darnell Mooney. You don't want Chase Claypool. I know you're not going to be able to trade these guys straight up individually for a great option in return, but if we can include them in a package with someone else to find an upgrade elsewhere in the starting lineup, that will be something I'm very interested in. Because with Justin Fields this past week, we can all agree, oh my gosh, career game for Justin Fields. By far and away the best game we've ever seen of Justin Fields for his NFL career. He had 123 passing yards. That's not a situation where you can confidently start a pass catcher in this offense. The passing volume's not there. Justin Fields so far this season has had one game with 200 or more passing yards, and that was 208 passing yards. One game this entire year, and that is not going to be getting the job done for any pass catcher in this offense. So while yes, Justin Fields himself is a phenomenal option in fantasy, do not buy into Cole Kmet. Do not buy into Darnell Mooney. Do not buy into Chase Claypool. If you can trade them for anything, you're going to have to do it because the passing volume is never going to be here in Chicago. I mean, his literal season high is 208 passing yards in an individual game. Now, I think that's all I got for you. Of course, thank you so much for checking out the video. If you enjoyed it, go down there, drop that like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down there in the comment section. In that comment section, you can also find a link to Underdog Fantasy. When you sign up for Underdog Fantasy and use promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Check out all these player props. My favorite is the PJ Walker less than passing yards this week. But thank you again. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great day and hope we get to see you in the live stream tonight.